Shop Chat. Shop Chat.
A staple of the barbershop art form is comedy, and through the years, the society has been entertained by many great comedy quartets, groups like Four Under Par, Cardiac Arrest, and Fred. And today we are very excited here on Shop Chat to have your 2010 international champions and our current reigning clown princes of comedy. Would you please welcome to the broadcast Stormfront? Guys, thanks for being with us here today.
They are pros, anything goes. My one is rose. She's the sweetest, the sweetest flower that grows.
I couldn't see. Was that barbershop?
What are you doing?
Well, the way we like to kick this show off when we have quartets on is to learn a little bit about how each of you individually came into the wonderful hobby of barbershop. So, Jeff, I thought I'd start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started in barbershop?
I lost a bet.
So did the rest of the world.
My dad joined the Dukes of Harmony in the fall of '76 and went to his first international contest in Philadelphia in '77 and won, and came away and said, oh, there's nothing to this. Show up, apparently. And so that was my first introduction to it. And our next door neighbor who introduced him brought over a Nighthawks album, Dealer's Choice album, and the very first Vocal Majority album. And I played those things until I wore the needle off the record, and then got new needles and just kept going, and then just could not. He had a pretty great collection, which was awesome. So I was probably about 9 at the time. And so that was it. I was hooked. First time I heard it.
Gotcha. Then when did you join the Dukes? Was that your first chorus?
No, at that time, you had to be 16 if your dad was in the chorus, and 18 otherwise. And I don't know if that was a rule that was universal or that was just their rule, but
Gotcha.
But I was looking at 7 long years before I could join. And then we moved to San Diego in the fall of '79, and Bobby Gray grabbed me and separated the front row and put me in the front row. And I just thought that was him being novel. You know, it was our first rehearsal, but I didn't think I was going to get to stay. And I remember my dad asking the membership guy, was there any way that they could break the rule? Because, you know, my son is crazy about this. And the guy said, what are you talking about? So yeah, that's when we realized that wasn't a universal thing. So I was so fortunate when I was 13 to get to be a part of the San Diego chorus, and that was my very first exposure for getting to participate.
Well, that's fantastic. And Sid, how about you? How did you get started?
I guess similar to Jeff in the sense that it was a family thing for me. I'm technically a third generation barbershopper. My grandfather on my mom's side was one of the charter members of a barbershop chorus chapter in small town Nebraska, where Jim and Darren and I all grew up. And my dad was also in that chapter, so I kind of grew up watching them do that. They were in my dad was in a comedy quartet, as a lot of people know, with Jim's dad and Darren's dad. Sang together my entire childhood. They were singing together before I was born, and in fact, they were singing darn near the moment I was born. So it it goes back as long as I can remember. I've known Jim and Darren and their families for as long as I can remember because of that. And that their quartet sang and did shows all the way up until I think it was, help me, Darren, January of 2011 when we lost Darren's dad, which was super unfortunate, but such a blessing that they were able to sing together for as many years as they did, and raise one collective cordial celebration family was the name of their quartet, cordial celebration. And so the family that we were able to grow up with was what I know, and I think I speak for Jim and Darren, that's what I know barbershop to be, was it's a big family. In our case, it happens to be largely centered around the quartet activity of our dads, but certainly the chapter activity and the extended families of the chapter, the Sugar Valley Singers, and based out of Scottsbluff, Nebraska was the name of the chapter. And so I think my first active involvement, other than being a spectator and giggling all the way through our dads doing shenanigans on stage and laughing at that and trying to get any chance I could to get up on stage with them for one of their songs or whatever it might be. But outside of that, I don't recall exactly how old I was when I did some of my first active engagement stuff singing with the chapter. I was probably in the 12, 13-year-old range kind of a thing. And
Gotcha.
and that's how I got into it. And from there, it's always been a part of my life. So
Well, that's awesome.
For me.
Now, Darren, I know that you guys just recently performed. I'm not sure when this will air, but you guys participated with a fantastic This Is the Moment AIC production in joint cooperation with the Harmony Foundation. And you guys, as a part of your set, did the magician routine. And am I remembering hearing somewhere that was actually a routine from your dad's quartet?
Yeah, absolutely. That was one that we stole from our dads, but they stole from the Notewits out of, I believe, the Northeast District. But we saw the Notewits do that at International in 1983 at an Afterglow, and we were all just out of breath laughing and going crazy over it, and then our dads expanded on that, and we expanded on it further. So it's one that we have about 2 or 3 songs that we've kept as kind of a cordial celebration tradition in our shows, and that's certainly one of them. It's the longest one.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And Darren, was there anything you wanted to add? I know that your and Sid and Jim's stories are also interconnected with each other, but anything from your point of view to add about how you got started in barbershop?
No, I was just going to say what Sid said. And if everybody pays attention, you can watch Sid's moves his legs all the time because his chair is vibrating behind him. So keep an eye on his chair anytime Sid talks.
All right. And Jim, how about you? Any things you'd like to add? Because again, your story is so intricately connected with these other guys.
Yeah, Sid's always vibrated like that ever since he was out there watching rehearsals. He says, and very first time we sang actually as a quartet, he was shaking like,
yes.
But no, it was amazing to grow up in the Sugar Valley Singers watching this. Our dad's quartet literally had been assured. Sid's mom had been assured that there was no chance that she was going to give birth to her second child before the weekend was up. So our dad's quartet left to do a show 90 miles away. And when they drove back, that night and drove into the farm, and Sid's dad got out and went inside. Sid's mom was sitting there saying, "We need to go to the hospital." And so we've always enjoyed the fact that our dad's quartet nearly didn't get to go forward, because had his dad missed the birth, it would have been a bad deal. But
Yeah. So that wasn't hyperbole. That was actually literally the case. That's fantastic. And then didn't some configuration of you guys sing together in college quartets as well?
Yeah, the Sid and I sang in a college quartet, so to speak. I was 25 and in grad school, and I figured I was too old, but Sid's college quartet was already singing, and they had asked me to coach them a little bit. We came back from Christmas vacation to find that their tenor could not then sing in the spring, if I recall correctly. And Sid had already called Jim DeBusman at headquarters to make sure that I was still young enough to compete. So I got to sub in for 1 year with Sid's college quartet, the old man, as it were. And,
What was the name of that quartet?
That was Millennium. And so back in '99, we got third place at International in the college contest. And then I moved away, and they replaced me with their original tenor. And the next year in Kansas City,
That's addition by subtraction, or subtraction by addition, like that. Well, while you have the floor, Jim, why don't you go ahead then and tell us how it wasn't that many years after, right, that Stormfront would have formed. So tell us about how you guys came to be a quartet.
Yeah, that was Darren. Well, Darren and I had sung in a quartet in Central States, and he got a job out in Denver the summer of '98. So he had moved away. Then Sid went to college the fall of '98, and so we had that little time. And then I went out to Denver in '99 in the summertime. And so Darren and I had talked for a long time about singing in a quartet again. And as it became clear that Sid was possibly after college graduation, going to move out to Denver, we began to talk about that at the end of the year of 2000. And so we had a couple of informal get-togethers during breaks. And when it became obvious that Sid was actually going to move to Denver the spring of 2001, we actually decided that 3 of us from Denver were going to drive to central Nebraska like the first weekend of March. And Sid was driving up from Maryville, Missouri. I'll try to say that 3 times fast. And so we met out there at Darren's folks' house late on a Friday night, sang until well after midnight that night, then rehearsed all the next day. And then we went to the show, the annual show for the local chorus was that night, which Darren's dad was part of all of that. And so we went to the Afterglow and had our first performance, singing a song or two on the Afterglow, which was, after basically 1 day's rehearsal. So Sid was not the only one shaking on that one. It was like, whoa, what have we done to ourselves? No pressure at all. And that was years and years before Jeff was crazy enough to actually join the quartet. So
right, very good. So Darren, back in somewhere around 2004 or 2005, you all had been competing and were kind of slowly making your way up in the 20. And I was living up in Elgin, Illinois at the time, and you guys came and did a show at Elgin. And I remember thinking, what an entertaining show set you guys had. Lots of funny moments, although you weren't billed as a quote-unquote comedy quartet. Your competition sets were, pretty conventional quartet sets. But it was clear that you guys enjoyed entertaining in a comedic way and that the audiences responded to it. So from your point of view, was it your goal always to eventually become a comedy quartet, or did that more evolve from your own experiences on stage in shows and so forth?
Well, it's an interesting question. We actually, from the beginning, as you're aware from seeing us early, our show set always had a lot of comedy, had a lot of entertainment value in it, and that was always a goal of ours. We just knew that if we went down the comedy route as a competition quartet, it's a little tricky. This is one of the kind of the truths about comedy and quartets, is that if you go there, then you have to stay there. And I remember seeing Fred, try to sing a ballad after they had been doing comedy for several years in contest, and even though they sang well, the audience just didn't buy it. And so we were always kind of aware of that. And so the question became, do we want to go full throttle on the contest stage with this? And eventually, Jeff was in. I'm going to let Jeff talk about this a little bit because he's got a unique perspective of watching the quartet when we kind of finally did turn over all to comedy in 2007. But once we went and we realized, yeah, this is us, and the audience kind of realized, yeah, this is you. It just became a lot more real and for the audience. And and the one thing I think it's so critical to be a great performer in any realm is that you've got to be honest.
Right.
Your performances have to be honest, and it's pretty honest to who we are. So I think kind of roundabout way of answering your questions, but hopefully I got there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That absolutely answers that. I know that when you start doing comedy and then you try to sing a serious song, the audience spends almost the entirety of the song waiting for the punchline. And like, for example, when you guys do Where or When, the way it is set up, it takes a while before you even know exactly what's going to happen. So when you do a few songs like that, then really you will leave the audience hung out to dry and disappointed ultimately if you don't kind of deliver. Now
we try to disappoint most of our audiences.
Now, Sid, going back and looking at your all's contest history, you were 19th, 17th, 13th. You made the 10 the first time in 2005, and from what I can see on the score sheet, you all basically did one parody that year. The next year, you also finished 10th, and you didn't really do parodies, but you did numbers like Bare Necessities and Would You Like to Swing on a Star that had very entertaining and comedic elements. Do you remember back at that point in time, as you all started to add more comedy into your contest sets, did you have a certain philosophy about how quickly, how slowly you wanted to do that?
No, but I would say that was a big stepping stone, because as Darren said, the realization of ourselves and the audience kind of at the same time as a part of that journey transitioning in it. We didn't schedule it out and map it to a timeline, even though my personality is one that would do that. We didn't math it out with a calculation of this month we're going to do this, and then we're going to roll in this. Like,
Gotcha.
But the songs you mentioned, Bare Necessities, Swinging on a Star, some of those definitely were some of the very early ones that incorporated, even though not comedy to the extent of the magic thing, or like,
right.
It's not comedy in that sense, but the entertainment hook of those songs were a stepping stone that we hadn't done before, and it was so painfully obvious to us, and I think everyone that that's just so much more of a natural fit for us than, as Darren said, it's just so much more honest than some of the more traditional pieces that we had done prior to that. And so it's not the car song, but it's a big stepping stone along the way.
That's right. And it's hard to imagine how a quartet making that evolution could have done it more naturally and organically than the way you guys did. It seemed to really fit. Now, my good buddy Jeff, I know he's been sitting there very patiently. I've been putting these questions together sort of in chronological order. So, Jeff, I have one more question before we bring you into the Stormfront scenario, and then it's pretty much going to be your show the whole rest of the time here. So, Jim, one question for you guys going into 2007. Looking back at the prelim quartet summary, you all were 11th, the 11th highest scoring quartet. Your first round, it looks to me from what I can tell, was basically two conventional songs. And then you did a parody in the second round. And then in the finals, full on comedy, and catapulted all of the way to third place. So you're 11th going in, you finished 10th 2 consecutive years. Now all of a sudden you are 2 heartbeats away from a gold medal, and you're going to have a personnel change, and you're going to have to find a new tenor. Was there any thought of, hey guys, this has been a great run, let's just close up shop, or how did that affect the quartet's
There's
mindset?
always a thought of that.
We've been trying to quit. We've been trying to quit for years. Yeah, it was 2007 was an interesting time, and again, we had done those first 3 songs of 2007, pretty standard fare, and I, speaking of vibrating, I just could not wait to get to song number 2 in the top 20,
right?
Because that was the first full-on, all-out, go for broke.
Right.
Full-on parody. We'd done a parody the year before in 06 in the top 10, which was the Sweet Adeline, old Bill Grogan's Goat thing, which was fun. Bright was the night. But we knew that this had legs to it. And so everything was just kind of coming together there. So to come off of that, and it was such a response, we said, well, I guess both songs in the top 10 have to be comedy now. So we made whatever that was. What is it? We always open the shows with it. I can't even remember now.
Was it Don't Fence Me In?
Yeah, it's Don't Fence Me In.
Don't fence me, let me be by myself in the evening breeze. Listen to the murmur of the cottonwood trees. Send me off forever.
But Don't Fence Me In, we had to spend all of Saturday morning turning it into a comedy number for the top 10 in 07. And so then, when we had the changeover in the fall to say, what are we going to do? And the other 3 of us knew that because of our history together, we wanted to keep singing. Gotcha. So whether it was going to be something totally new, whether it was going to be, let's continue on with what we're doing, we were willing to go whichever directions we needed to. And, gotcha. And so we figured after a long, exhaustive search that we wanted to be a serious quartet again. So we figured we're going to take the bass of Riptide and turn him into the tenor of a comedy quartet, and that would be about as serious a change as we could make. We're all concerned.
Well, now that leads me to Jeff. So Jeff, you have been such a great bass in barbershop for so long, particularly with Riptide. Had you ever considered singing tenor before? And what interested you, not simply in singing tenor with a quartet, but singing with a quartet that has evolved so quickly into a comedy quartet?
I joined Stormfront for the groupies.
Both of them.
Yeah.
I'd never sung tenor except tags until my audition. Mm-hmm. So I was just as shocked that they had shown any interest as anybody else. It was really Eric King that spoke to Sid on my behalf, and then Sid reached out and spoke to Jim and Darren, and put the word in. And but I mean, literally, Royce Ferguson was available at that time, and they were third in the world. I couldn't believe that they would want to, give an audition to somebody who had never even sung the part before.
Right.
So, yeah, I was stunned.
And then what interested you in being in a quartet that has now blossomed into a fantastic comedy quartet?
Well, I was desperate. When I left, Riptide in the fall of 05, I'd gotten a couple of phone calls, not to sing in other quartets, but from people whose voices I trusted, opinions I trusted, and they said, "Oh my God, your phone's going to ring off the hook." And not only did it not ring off the hook, but 2 years later, the first phone call I got was from a guy that I think at that time was in a 12th place quartet. And I was so desperate. It was such an ego butt kicking that remember, it just took forever for him to get to the question. So, we were, how are your kids? How's this? How's life? Blah, blah, blah. And then finally he says, well, I have a question for you. And at that point, I would have said yes to anything. And he asked me if I knew any basses that might be interested in singing in a quartet. He had zero interest in having me sing with him. And that was the bottom of the barrel.
Oh, my word.
Yep,
Just when, that's when the girl calls you up to see if your brother might want to go out
right,
with it.
Exactly. I just, I remember I had to pull the car over the side of the road and take a moment because, you know, God was helping teach me some lessons, and it was awesome. And I needed those lessons. It was very humbling, and I honestly just assumed at that point that, you know, at that point I was doing no barbershop at all, because I chose to, you know, stay home with the kids and be dad and all that, and I was loving that and building businesses and all that, but I wasn't coaching, judging, chorusing, or quartetting. It was a really weird, after 30 something years, weird interval. And so and honestly, I had just thought, you know, I really wanted to win, but when I would go into my closet and I would see my Riptide uniforms and I would see the medals hanging on hangers and stuff, and say, I got nothing to cry about.
Yeah.
You know, for someone with marginal talent, I squeezed as much blood out of that stone as I could, and I was okay with that. And then Sid called, and you know, if they had asked me to, you know, run down the street, you know, with a toga on, I would have done it.
Yeah.
And I did.
Now, Darren, going into the 2008 contest in Nashville, you are third place, but you've got a new tenor. And going back and looking at that contest, my word, what a loaded contest. OC Times, State Line, Red Line, Old School, Metropolis, Crossroads, Glory Days. You guys were 8th going into from the prelim scores. So Darren, what, with all of these changes, but also with all the success, do you remember what were your expectations going into that 2008 contest?
You know, honestly, we just wanted to continue to kind of hone our craft and get Jeff in the mix. He was really, really scared about falling out of the medals, but we really were not, because we knew, I mean, you had 3 brand new quartets with big guns, with Old School and Crossroads and Redline, you know, I think all started that year.
Yeah.
And so we knew that third place all of a sudden became a lot harder thing, and especially with a new singer. So we kind of focused a little bit more rather than anything else. We're just getting Jeff into the mix, making sure he was part of the show, and then honing our comedy. We started doing certainly more comedy that year. My favorite memory as a contest quartet memory came from that year, even though we were 6th, and it was kind of just a fun development time. We didn't put a lot of pressure on ourselves other than Jeff.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, you know, that's what I remember from it.
Now, that was one of those contests where you could score significantly higher than you did the previous contest and yet go down in placement, which is exactly what happened. You guys went up a full 2 percentage points, which at that level, those are very hard points to get by, and finished 6th. Although in the finals round, you guys had the 3rd highest score in that round. And it's one of my all-time favorite audience memories is watching you guys completely conquer the audience that night.
It was fun. I was alluding to that. Our last song was the song that went on probably 7 or 8 minutes. But we had the audience stopped us 3 times in that song with applause, and we just had that. And it was ridiculous. And I remember walking off stage with the guys, and I said, I don't care if we ever win, as long as we can do that to an audience.
Right. I have 2 personal memories from that set. Eddie and I, the lead of our quartet, we were sitting together, and in the midst of all of the laughter, he turned to me and he said, I want to do that. And then the other thing I remember is I saw one of you guys in like one of the Afterglow rooms, and I went up and I congratulated you. And quite honestly, in my mind, I was congratulating you for finishing higher than you did the previous year. Only then to realize they dropped out of the medals, you dummy. But it was because you guys had so clearly won the audience. I felt like, in terms of impact, there was no question that you guys had significantly moved. So now, Jeff, here is your first contest as a tenor in a comedy quartet, and you go out and in the final round simply obliterate the audience. What was that like from your perspective?
Sorry, I have to go.
Chicken.
Yeah, I mean, you know, one of the things with Riptide, we were always, I think, not accused of, but we were known for not taking chances. We wanted to be keepsake, and we knew we never would. But what mattered to us the most was just digging in our heels and trying to ring as many chords as we could. That's what we got off on. And so as a result, there was not a lot of audience connectivity, and so that was always something that just tugged at me, because I would like, you know, the difference between where we were floating at the 4-5-3 range and watching all these other quartets that had been behind us go over top of us and win. They all had that thing, that it thing. And it's impossible to buy it. It's impossible to teach somebody it, whatever that it thing is, from power play to gotcha to four voices to, it just was so painful to work so hard. And then most of what happened in 08, you know, I was just hanging on for dear life. I didn't know what was going to work and what wasn't, but I didn't care. And we had done enough shows and seemed to get some good audience reaction that, you know, I trusted that the audience was going to enjoy it. But what happened, and especially the last night, the finals in 08, was, I would tell you that that's probably, other than winning, my greatest barbershop experience ever, because being in the grip of mostly Jim, but Jim, Darren, and Sid, knowing exactly who they were and exactly what was going to work, because their barometer is so unbelievably good at knowing what you're going to think is funny. And so it was just almost an out of body experience. In fact, I can't tell you what was actually said because this is a PG show, but if you go back and watch that performance, that last song, when the three of us are on the ground and Jim is crawling over top of us, you know, we're as much in disbelief in that moment, talking to each other through our knees, having this conversation while you know 8,000 people are chanting Jim, 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 and like, what is going on? What is? I mean, if for me, and I don't say this lightly at all, for me, it's like joining the Beatles and going out on stage and hearing that audience going bananas. And it's like, that's like a fantasy. That's like you know, if you could write the script, that's what it would be like, but nobody would believe it was true. Yeah. And so it was just an out of body thing for me. I was just hanging in there. I'd memorized my stuff, so you know, I wouldn't screw stuff up. And you know, because I still don't have a really good sense of what the three of them just innately know of the timing and why it goes here and all of that. I just knew that my beats were here and don't miss it. And that's why it was so much fun, you know, at the end of that thing, when Jim did the gopher from, Jim, is that from Winnie the Pooh? Where's that? And you know, let's sing a tag. It's from Winnie the Pooh, right?
Basically, yeah.
And my dad used to do that. He used to imitate that when I was a kid with the whistle.
Shall we sing a tag?
Right.
With the S's.
Right.
And I had been hanging on all week. All week. It was so fun, and it was so stressful. It's like being on a log and just trying not to fall off.
Right.
And we'd be backstage, and Jim would say something like, "Hey, in this section of the song, we're going to change 'and' to 'the.'" What? And why? Because it's funnier. That's why. And he was always right. But like the three of them would go, "Got it." And it takes me days and days to unwrite the hard drive and rewrite the hard. So it was constantly just
right.
all
Right.
And so when Jim did that thing with the whistle, that was it. I was out. I couldn't hold it in anymore. So what everybody saw, that wasn't. I've had people say, "Oh yeah, you guys." No, that wasn't planned at all. I just couldn't hold it together anymore.
Gotcha. Now, Sid, Jeff just mentioned a moment ago that one of the big advantages he had jumping into the quartet was having the chance to be in a lot of shows before your first international together. Talk a little bit, if you would, about how do shows help, particularly a quartet, doing the kinds of things that you all were going to be doing?
Yeah, well, two things. In our case, Jim mentioned 2007 was an interesting time for us, and one reason is because when our quartet started, all four members were in Denver, and we all sang in the Sound of the Rockies chorus. Darren and Jim were director, co-director, and it was a chapter quartet by all definitions of a chapter quartet. 2007, my family moved to Atlanta, which is part of it's part of the story with Jeff too. But the reason that ties into your question is because shows for us became the lifeblood of time together. Yeah. So having that, we all have day jobs that aren't barbershop. Unfortunately, it'd be nice if it was. But so we were, and the time continued to increase because there was a pretty direct correlation to time together. Even though a lot of that time is laughing and pushing each other into the bushes, that time together, there was a direct correlation with the number of ideas that we came up with, the quality of the ideas that we came up with, the amount of prep and energy we could put into all that. It's all, it all stems from time. So yeah, those shows for us were critical for that time together, but then they were also critical for exploring new ideas, because in a comedy quartet, you have to take risk. The first time you do it, it's always a risk. Right. And we had our fair share of comedy ideas that knocked the cover off the ball, and we had our fair share of ideas that should have never seen the light of day. And but you don't know that until
that's right.
You can think it's the funniest thing we've ever talked about, and it doesn't always translate to the audience the same way, or vice versa. Something that we try or that happens on accident that wasn't put there to drive the biggest laugh, but ends up being something that is interpreted extremely funny. So right. I think our certainly leading up from 2008, 9, 10, those 3 years in particular, I think our show weekends, I know they involved everybody getting out of work as early as we possibly could on Friday and rehearsing until we couldn't rehearse anymore on Friday night, wherever we were headed. Saturday, if there was one show or two shows, we were rehearsing every minute that we weren't on the show or eating, which is a lot of minutes. And then Sunday, we would rehearse all morning and all day Sunday and take the last flight back home. So maximum the weekend. And then also bringing in coaches. We had Chad Guyton and Rick LaRosa traveled with us, one or both of them, almost to every show. because that fifth ear, not only from a singing standpoint, but from a comedy timing delivery standpoint, having that fifth ear to help provide real-time feedback. Our shows in large part became rehearsals. We'd rehearse,
Gotcha.
we'd go do it on a show, and then we debrief on what worked and what didn't. So for us, the shows were not only a lifeblood with respect to our improvement, but that's where we get so much joy and time to laugh with each other and the audiences and everything too. So we spent a lot of time on the road, and it's by far one of our most favorite things that we got to do.
Well, that's awesome. Now, I want to talk about your coaches a little bit here in a second, but before I leave your show sets, Darren, you guys are very famous. I mean, from the time I saw you in Elgin way back in the day, for concluding your show sets with Bugler's Holiday. I'd love to find out more about how that came to be a staple as a closer for the quartet.
Actually, that was something we carried over from the free fall quartet that Jim and I were in the Central States District. We happen to have 2.5 trumpet players and a really, really good trombone player. And so we started at that point realizing, okay, well, what's something we could do that we can kind of still barbershop a little bit, but it's going to be so unique to us and something that nobody else has been doing.
Right.
And so, that's where that formulated. But we were able to pull it over into Stormfront and keep it alive. And it's just Fred Farrell from Crossroads said a couple weeks ago, prior to the AIC show, he says just one of the greatest closers in the history of barbershop quartets. And so we're fortunate that we had the skill to be able to do it, to pull it off, and or maybe the stupidity to try it.
I think one of the reasons that has such a great impact on the audience is sometimes when you do a lot of comedy, there can almost be an unstated assumption that, well, these guys aren't such great musicians, but at least they're really funny. And then when you put that on the audience, it's like, these guys are like real musicians, so it just like doubles your credibility with the audience. Now I have to ask, Jeff, when you joined the quartet that is famous for this closer, and you're going to be playing the trombone, had you ever played the trombone before?
I have to go. Yeah, when I was in high school and then a little bit in college, not well, obviously, but yeah, I played 3 years in high school, 10, 11,
Okay.
and 12. Yeah.
Well, that worked out really well. Now, Jim, I wanted to go back to talk about coaching just a little bit, because all through this time, as you guys are making a serious climb into contest, as much as all of us here today hate this, they do judge singing in these contests and not just comedy. And I'd love for you to talk about, first of all, the value of singing well as a comedy quartet, but then also who your singing coaches were and what some of the things were that you guys had to work on as a quartet.
Yeah, the absolute worst part about trying to do comedy well is that you have to do all the other stuff. If we're talking about contest, we have to do all the other things that all the other quartets have to do also, and then do the comedy on top of it. So we usually don't realize that when we get into comedy, that, hey, this is going to be, 10, 20, 40 times more work than just singing well. So that was, when it came to the work part of it, that was the, sort of the go run the stairs again and again and again and again, that individually needing to work on the singing craft part of it and sing it into the ground so that when we were together, we could be working on all of the shtick and then go back and the number of times that we would have to, again, with coach in the room, one or both of them, to say, nope, stop, do that again, because that's screwing this up. Sing it without the shtick, lock it in. All right, now sing it with the shtick, and trying to get to that point where it's as pristine singing wise as it can be without losing the fun part of it. And that is such a difficult thing to do. And again, we have always been the upside down quartet. And what Sid was talking about earlier, and Darren was talking about earlier with who we were, when we decided to go all comedy, what we found is that when we tried to focus exclusively on singing really well and being great, we actually were worse than we were just being total free for all on stage. It kind of freed up everything. So we actually sang better when we were being totally ridiculous.
Gotcha.
And so the coaching piece of it on singing, you know, we had coaches in the early days, Jim Casey, rest his soul, from Texas, who we'd known for many, many years. And he helped us out before we even were an official quartet, not competing yet at International 2001. We got together with him in his room and he coached us for an hour. And then we had, we had Kim Holbert, Kim Vaughn now. Mm-hmm. She coached us a bunch in those early years on singing, which was tremendously helpful. But it was prelims of 2007, which was over in the Salt Lake Valley. And one of the singing judges on that panel was Chad Guyton. And we went in, and it was our highest prelim score to date. Felt great about it, got the score sheets, and our singing scores were basically where they'd been for 6 years. And so we wanted to go talk to Chad because he was the low scorer, and we wanted to find out what was going on. We had him first, ironically. We walked in the room, and Chad saw us. He said, I know, you want to know. And we said, no, we just want to understand, right? We just want to know why. And he said, well, here's why. And he sat us down, and that 20 minutes went by in a blink. And we said, can we come back after we're done with everything else? So we saw our other two judges and then came back to his room, spent another hour and a half. And Chad was talking, it was all about the basics, going back to block and tackle of singing all the same things, all the same vowels. Singing in tune, obviously, is a no-brainer, but you got to do it. And just going all the way back to the building blocks. It was kind of funny because we were looking at each other saying, we've kind of outsmarted ourselves. We've been trying so hard to be more complex about this.
Right.
And he took us back there. So from that time, late April, to where, again, we were sitting 11th going in, right? So we worked from late April through International there going into Denver in 2007. It was just nothing but the basics. And coached with Chad once or twice, and then he was in the pit, I think, at International. So we coached with Brandon Guyton then a couple of times, and it was just that. And then suddenly, boom, our singing scores were higher than they'd ever been, and we end up in the medals. And so the interesting thing was, it may have been right after International 07, maybe it was into 08, I can't remember, but something Chad said to us early on in the process. He said, look, presentation scores, you guys don't have to worry about that. Obviously, it's going to be fine. We said, okay. He said, music scores will come along for the ride. He said, the singing score, all you have to do is get to the point where your singing score average, if it's 87 or above, you win the contest. And so the first time that our singing score averaged 87 and above, I think it was like 87.8 or something, was International 2010. So the first time, it was so prophetic of him to say, if you don't have to have the highest singing score, because if your singing score can just get above 87, you're going to win International. And that's exactly what happened.
Well, that's actually one of the questions I was going to ask you guys, if you had worked out sort of a formula for how to pull this off. So that's great. That's fantastic.
Sing as well as we could.
Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you've ever seen Stormfront perform, it's not going to be a big surprise to you that our interview with them has run a little long. But just like their performances, it's all quality stuff. So we are excited to bring part 2 of our Shop Chat conversation with Stormfront.
In olden days, the stock arrangements of polecats were sung by all the gents on their shows. Here's how it goes. My wild Irish rose, the sweetest flower
That's barbershop right there, baby.
Yeah.